Yes, we do a lot in water. We like water, and we think it's actually got a lot of promise. It's got its warts, it's got its problems and peculiarities, but it's big. We all need it. It pretty much does, it gets involved in anything we do. So for us as a bank, it's quite different from the normal digital media and internet business we do and the clean tech stuff, but we find it's an exciting place to be. And when we first looked at it, we, in a very simplistic way, divided it into three areas. One is, I guess, what I've been hearing about the energy nexus and wastewater and so on, and which is a great place, and we've done some deals there. The other one was what Adam just spoke about, which is network management, which is a very, very cool place to be. The third place we feel is in membrane technology, or desalination, as folks call it. So we thought we would do a report on desal, and which we did one about 6-7 months ago. And to make it easier on ourselves, we picked out about 10 or 12 names out of a hat of people that were really the leaders in the market, kind of helped us along the way, some of which were actually here today. But just in brief, just as the size of the market, I mean, it's basically doubling. So you don't see that often in water, and that caught our attention. I mean, it's not without its volatility. As you can see, between 2007 and 9, most of the large desal facilities were put on hold. That put a huge amount of pressure right through the value chain. The financial crisis took hold. Most of these are large municipal projects, but we're back. And as you can see, the breakup of the type of technology that is being used, it's clearly a membrane business. There's a lot of multi-stage flash or thermal desal still out there, but membrane has clearly, since the mid-90s, really taken off as the main technology. Part of the report, I mean, you can't read this, but there are over 15,000 desal facilities in the world. And as the market's about to double, what's interesting, it's not just in the big players. It's going to be right across the spectrum. And we even have a desal plant here in London. I mean, right down at the end of the Thames. I mean, it's one of Piers's assets. So you'll find desal in surprising places. It's not just what we typically have thought of as being a very expensive form of water that you find in the Middle East. You're finding desal everywhere. And so we decided to dig deeper into that. And then we found that from an investment and a banker's perspective, what are the kind of the drivers? What's really happening here in this market? Because typically a VC or an investor will say, okay, I want to invest in new technology, so show me something that is going to change the world or be disruptive or where I can make a 10x. Now, unfortunately, the world of water doesn't quite work that way. I think as an investor, one has to think differently and start to calibrate their return and risk expectations, in particular towards that industry specifically. So we thought, okay, given that, and to avoid any upsets, let's figure out what's going on that's underlying the kind of the positive views that we've got. The first thing is that rather than looking for the next new technology, we actually have technology today that has driven down the cost by 80%. So the disruption from a membrane and a technology perspective has already happened. Is there more to come? I mean, most of the experts we spoke to felt that, yes, there's another 20-30% in the short term that could come in terms of energy saves on membranes, and maybe going way out, you could get considerably more. But still, with those membranes, you're getting actually fairly cheap water on an OPEX base of around $0.50. I mean, that's a pretty cutting edge number. The second thing we saw was that it's not just about seawater. Desal, we often think of the Middle East again, but in North America, the vast majority of desal is actually for brackish water. Whether it's drilling for water near the coastline where you get kind of semi-seawater, or you're going down into the aquifers where you're at a level where you're actually picking up a lot of minerals and things that you need to extract from the water. Typically, brackish water desal is about half the price of seawater, i.e. there's about half of the stuff you need to take out. So it's actually an even cheaper way of getting water. So you'll find in places like Florida, a lot of the water is desal, and it's quite efficient. The other thing with membranes, you actually can design the water. And by advanced membrane technology, you can start to select what you're going to take out. So it wasn't just about producing, from seawater. You don't necessarily need to be near the sea. The third driver, we thought, which was really important, was that the plants could now be quite small. And in fact, by having plants be small, I mean, Adam talked about the expense of moving water around. I think in California, the cost of moving water around is higher than making the water, which is actually a little crazy, but that's what it is. So having said that, if you look at kind of what the different prices for water, a generally accepted cost of water, if you're an industrial or even in a free open market, is somewhere above $2 a ton. And in some cases, it's remarkably more than that. And in others where it's not actually priced out, the cost is still there, it's just held at the municipal level. But what you have here is an OPEX, which is well through that sort of threshold. So you're into a level where, we talked about the 80% drop. I mean, we've come down from $2.50, say 15 years ago, and after the introduction of membrane technology, which has brought it into, the zone of what we could call acceptability. Now, the way we look at it as well is saying, well, if desalination is the most expensive form of water, shouldn't that start your thought process as a municipal or an industrial about how does that fit into your water portfolio? So if that's the most expensive and that's affordable, well, what about the less expensive types of water? So it's actually with large water companies that started the thought process of saying, well, then let's think more about brackish water. Let's think more about water reuse. Water reuse is probably 25% of the cost of desal. In Israel, once they desalinate the water, they use it at least twice. If you've gone through the expense, even $0.50, they'll use it 3 times, which makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, demand management is the cheapest form of water production, i.e. no loss. In terms of size of plant, I think what was interesting for us is that a small-scale plant today of, let's say, under 10,000 units is less than the cost of desalination about 10 to 15 years ago. So by changing that scale, you can produce localized forms of water. For example, in the Caribbean, companies such as Seven Seas, they produce water on the islands without, in the old days, they used to have to ship it around, which was by far the most expensive form of water. We won't go through all of these, but here's the kind of players that are in that sector, and that's going to do one thing but grow. I mean, it's a profitable business to be in. And many of them are expanding their facilities or building new units in many of the geographies we look at. Just one company here I bring to your attention. I mean, when we talk about desal and kind of the role that a company would need to play in it, ERI, many of you may know that name, Energy Recovery Inc. They produce what is really a widget. It's a pressure recapture mechanism where they really took off around the year 2000. They had done absolutely everything right. They were a disruptive technology. They reduced the energy cost of a desal plant by over 60%. This is a unit that costs less than 1 to 1.5% of the cost of a desal plant, but reduced the energy cost by 60%. But it still took these guys 8 years to get to the market in full acceptability. I mean, today you can't finance a desal plant without their kit. I mean, it's that good. But it still took them that long. So as being a poster child and in having the right management, the right technology, the right client, everything, they did everything the way one would need to be successful. It wasn't a slam dunk. It took them a long time. When we look at investment opportunities and speak to the investors that we have as clients about, okay, well, if I want to get involved in the water, where should I invest? I think so classically, as we were saying earlier, should I invest in membrane technology or aquaporins? Aquaporins is it's almost like, copying Mother Nature where you actually have intelligent membrane. It behaves like cell tissue, where it can select individually different molecules to go through. So it's in a way desalination without any pressure. It's the way plants extract fresh water from seawater. Or forward osmosis. I think while they're all really interesting technologies, they have a large degree of risk when you compare it to the history of companies like ERI. So guys that crossed all the boxes still took them a long time. The record shows that companies in these sectors, while really interesting, will still have a very long gestation period. And will, if you're a classic VC going in saying, I want to go in and out, what was it, 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to have some disappointments, unless you're at a fairly late stage. What we found was perhaps a better way to look at it, was to look at the kind of the gaps that are in the market of saying, well, if we have reached that level of disruption already where the water produced by a desal process is affordable, where is the money to be made? There's still a lot of CapEx, efficiencies that could be made. There's still a lot of plant uptime that could be closed. I mean, plants do actually only operate at around 70, 75% of the time. And going into other applications. The replacement market for membranes is going to be a very, very, very big market. Membranes have to be replaced on average about every 4 to 5 years. And given that the market has doubled in the last couple of years and is about to double again, you can see the replacement market starting to appear. And the interesting thing is they're all the same size, so they're kind of a little bit of a plug and play. Great for the aftermarket. And so we think that there's some interesting business models coming there. The one that's maybe taking out the largest amount of kind of interest for us is the system integrator. It's the company that can use membrane technology along with different filtrations and start to build an overall business. I mean, a little bit like a Blue Water or a company like that that can have a client base that's diversified enough but use standard products and put them together in a specialized way in which to create a vertical for, let's say, the food and beverage industry or for the mining industry or for the pharmaceutical. These are the kind of guys that are going to see rapid growth. And it's not about the next membrane. It's about really addressing a customer's need and engaging. So it's really about good old-fashioned business management. Lastly, on asset ownership and DBO models, we see a lot of transactions, more project-based transactions, which are earning 30 to 40% on an unlevered basis for small desal plants around the world. A lot in the Red Sea, a lot in the Caribbean. So I think when you look at it as an investment, rather than going after that next technology, you can make perhaps more by going after the application of that technology. One story we saw come across when we were writing the report was really kind of interesting for us. There's the island of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which had a big thermal desalination facility built in the mid-70s. And it was attached to the power plant, so it was all part of the water and the power utility were all part of the same facility there. And early November, just before the holiday season gets underway, the plant collapses. And it gets to a point where you just can't repair it. So this supplied, I think, 95, 97% of the water for the island. So the island would have effectively had to shut down or just tanker in the water. So it was quite a crisis, not just for the tourists coming in, but for the local residents. The solution was provided by Seven Seas. And I think this picture for us said it all. I mean, you got this massive, great big multi-stage flash plant that they had. And right in the middle, you've got 8 white containers that produce as much water as that whole plant at about half the price. And that was delivered in 46 days. So in a way, it kind of, for us, very quickly, showed how far we have moved. And where this, I mean, there are many other locations around the world where communities are starting to look at this kind of a solution as a real potential. So as a result, we're talking with a number of entrepreneurs that are setting up facilities like this in the Middle East. And the return levels are they're more dependable, and in the mid-30s is something that even VCs get excited about.